Hello gang. Don't know if you can all see me yet. We'll see whether they get me approved and whether I get on board. Wonder how many people are watching today. Who's in? Nice chamomile tea. Soothe the nerves. So, from the looks of things, looks like we are all set to go. Hello, hello. Thank you for welcoming me into the group. Awesome. So, yeah, we'll just see how many people we can get involved in the meantime. See who's keen to get involved with this. At the moment, I can see we're getting a few more as we go. When you jump in to the chat, just give us a wave. Give us a thumbs up, a comment, maybe how you're feeling. Let me know you're there. Let me know that you guys are involved and happy. It is Friday after all. Weekend's here. Party time is around the corner. We're going to be doing a bit of a segment on storytelling today. So it's a good time to maybe have a few thoughts, a few things about, what are your favourite stories? What does a story mean to you? Things like that. Over the next half an hour or so, we're going to be delving into a whole different range of things. At lots of points I'm going to touch base with you guys, see if we can get some feedback going. I'd love to have a discussion with you guys who are out there, and maybe get a little bit of an insight into what your thoughts are on storytelling and where it fits into modern day. It's a complicated thing. It's been around for a long time, but we'll get into that pretty shortly. We might make another minute or two, see who gets involved, and once 3:35 comes around, we'll get stuck into it. Yeah, hope everyone's having a wonderful day. It's going to be a lot of rain over the weekend, I've heard. Good weather to get your gumboots in, maybe get out in the garden, do some planting. I know I've been doing lots of gardening recently. I don't know how much of that has been going on in the iheartdardanup community, but it's definitely something that's brought me a lot of peace. I think it's been productive. That's the key. Feel free to comment below what some of your projects have been. What are you getting up to in these holidays or in these extended periods at home? I'd love to hear more about what's going on down in that region. Yeah, I think by the time we'll be ready to start, my cup of tea will be perfectly brewed. Should be excellent. One more. Get to 10. 10 sounds like a really good number. Hey, Damien. Awesome. All right. Well, let's get stuck into it then, hey? So, before we get into anything really content delivered, I'd love to do a little welcome to country. You guys have probably done a little bit of this in your community before, maybe at school, maybe in more of a social environment. But on behalf of everyone here, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're on, the Whadjuk people in Perth, and the Ngalakala people down south towards where Dardanup area is. I wish to acknowledge and respect the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing culture and contribution that they make to the life in this region. I'm drinking a nice cup of chamomile tea, perfect for relaxing and unwinding. It's delicious. Perfect. So let me tell you guys a little bit about myself. My name is Shaq, as you might have got from the post earlier. I am, I'd like to say a professional storyteller, but I'd like to say probably amateur is more relevant, more appropriate. I've had lots of experience in storytelling in both a professional and a hobby role. Something that might be getting more and more traction is Dungeons and Dragons. That's a whole storytelling genre in its own. I've been maybe a 5-year participant in that kind of story role. I've also worked as a tour guide, and any of you who has been on a tour, comment below where you may have been on a tour before, know that the tour guides generally have a lot of stories that they're willing to share with you. So I've got a few of those. And more recently, poor kids here. Hi Vic, how you guys going? I hope it's going to be going well. And finally, more recently, I've taken up a job as a facilitator in which storytelling is a big part of that. And it's only in that last role that I've really, truly started to understand the power of storytelling. Doing the Harrop project. I have no idea what that is, James, but I'm interested to find out. So, stories obviously have a lot of different impacts and meanings to a lot of different people. But I thought before we get into any kind of conversation about, that kind of thing, I'd share an example of a story with you guys. Something that is a little bit close to all of us here. And the story that I chose that I could tell quickly to you guys is the story, the Indigenous Noongar creation story of the area here. A lot of you guys might be familiar with this, but I will read this interpretation that I have, and then we can have a discussion of it after. So, in the beginning, all across the land there was a terrible drought. The bush, the plants, the meat became hard, tough, and rank. So 3 old people from the tribe, the elders, they went down to the sea, and they began to pray to the Creator to come out of the water. And it was in the form of a snake, which they called the Wackle. Now the Wackle was green and smokish grey, and so it was almost unnoticeable in the water. And it came out of the sea and along the path into the inlet near Mandurah. Now, having created the inlet, the Wackle gave birth to its young in the estuary, which formed its unique shape that it is today. The Wackle's young stayed in the estuary until they grew big and fat. But soon they left their birthplace and they started travelling uphill. And the travelling paths that these snakes took formed the Murray, the Harvey, and the Serpentine rivers. Now, the mother Wackle, she missed her young ones, and she thought they'd gone south. So she went down underground and she came up near Lake Clifton to look for them. She didn't find anyone there, and so she went down again to Lake Preston and had a look around again. She kept going down and around until she created all the flat land around the Leschenault estuary and down near Australind. She went right through the Leschenault estuary, came back through the land and carved down through the Brunswick, Preston and Collie rivers before eventually finding her way back to the ocean. And she never found her children. Pretty sad. What happened was the little ones, they actually went to the east. Now they were really fat, big fat Wackle children when they left, and they started going uphill, forming those big great rivers and swamps. And they kept going and going until they finally rested. Now, the reason they had to stop is because they kept pushing away from the ocean from their mother, and they started to get thin, starved, famished, hungry, thirsty, and they started to dissolve. Now, when they dissolved right at the end of these swamps, they died and they went down into the ground, and they created underground springs, right, when they went back to heaven, back to the ocean. Now, as they went, underwater was supplied back to the area, and the water restored the land again and basically erased the drought. Now, the old people believed that when the young of the woggle became water, the bush got more moisture, more sap, and the sap flowed into the animals, and the animals became fat and tender, and the 6 seasons of Noongar culture began to work again, and the land was green once more. So that's a story as told by Joe Wally, an Aboriginal elder, who talks a little bit about the creation of this area and how that happens. And you see through that story that he is talking about landmarks, he is talking about beliefs and values of the people, he is talking about cultural identities and seasons and knowledge. So all of these things kind of make up that story. So I'd like to kind of pitch it out to the people who are watching here today. What do you guys think a story is? Send a comment below about what you think a story is in general. No pressure at all, guys. Not waiting on every word from you guys to continue through. Maybe this will spark a little bit more of your creativity. In my opinion, I think there's 2 different types of stories, right? There's stories that are made up, and there's stories that are based in truth, right? So in those 2 categories, in made up stories and truthful stories, can we think of any examples, any, memories or thinking of that you think might be a story? It might be made up or a true story. Vic, someone that can express themselves and tell the story. Absolutely. Something that we can all do through storytelling is express ourselves, and we'll get into a little bit later as well. But I like to think of that as the point of view or the goal of a story. Definitely reflects how someone feels and what they want to express, for sure. I think that can definitely filter into both. So you can be expressing yourself in a story that is made up of your own devising, or you can be expressing yourself in a story that is based in truth, right? And this is shown in all different kind of ways. So we'll take an example from way back in the day, right? We'll take an example of like a historical story. For example, the story of Julius Caesar and his assassination. Now, the person who told that story obviously was expressing this betrayal, this, turning against of this great leader. And that story itself shows their viewpoint and their expression towards that incident in history, as well as keeping a record of that kind of thing. On the other hand, if you talk about more of like a made-up story, perhaps let's talk about like a myth of like Hercules. Hercules was forced to undergo all these trials, 12 different trials and labours in order to prove himself to the gods. And each of these different trials and tribulations had a different value that was being challenged in that time. So the author of that story, while it may be true, might be made up, might be based in a loose amount of truth, is definitely pushing some values that narrator believes to be true or valuable or relevant. So if that's the case, where did stories come about? How long have they been around for? What's their relevance? When was the last time that you guys heard a story? And where did you hear it? Feel free to comment that below as well. Stories have been around for a very, very, very long time. Originally, as you heard from that Indigenous story that I shared earlier, stories were a way of sharing knowledge, information, and customs through word of mouth, which we call oral tradition, right? And these stories were to help to guide the next generation and continue to pass on this knowledge from generation to generation before we had any kind of written or recorded history, right? So these stories that we hear about from Aboriginal time, for example, that's just repetition. The same stories told over and over again for thousands and thousands of years, all of them carrying some information about the geography of the land or the behaviour of a person or a custom that is acceptable. And so this story dates all the way back as far as humanity is concerned. But that's not the only reason why we tell stories. Another reason is exactly what Vic was saying, was to express ourselves, to form connection. If you want to put a comment below as to why you think this is valuable, this story as connection, or why you think people would tell stories, please do. But this kind of connection that we can tell through stories, I guess, based around shared experiences, relevance, intrigue. If I'm sharing a story about a trip to the shops and, the person in the alleyway who, in the aisle who took the last toilet roll or things like that, that's a relevant thing. That's something that we can share and therefore connect over. Maybe I'm telling a story about when I was a kid and some of the crazy, silly things that I used to do there. Again, it's all about relevance and connection and that shared history. And the thing with a good story is that it can really provoke a lot of emotion. It can really make you feel something. So stories come in all ranges and sizes and in all different formats. Traditionally, they were oral stories, right? And these come in lessons. The last time that you had a teacher tell you something, it was probably in some kind of story. Pythagoras' theorem, right? That came from a guy called Pythagoras who invented this thousands of years ago, and you had to hear the story so that they could teach you how to figure out the angles of a triangle. Entertainment, campfire songs, spooky stories, poems, things like this. These are all stories as well, and they were just done to entertain and involve each other. Play, right? Sometimes we tell stories to ourselves when we're a kid. Do you remember that? Do you guys remember being out in the backyard and having like a stick or something in your hand and imagining in your brain all these monsters and goblins and men that you had to fight through to rescue this princess? That was a story that you were creating, or I was creating, to entertain ourselves, to play. So that's been happening for thousands and thousands of years as well. What else have I got here? So stories are in every single culture, right? And they all share a different role. Sometimes a story is a warning, sometimes it's to carry information, and sometimes it's just to be descriptive and instructive. So I know there are people use memory techniques that involve a story, and that allows them to anchor onto things. And us as human beings, we are emotional creatures. We require that kind of connection, something that makes that soulful side of us go, and feel something in order to remember it truly and deeply. Now, we know that in the past, always oral, right? Always spoken word. But eventually someone invented a little something called the written language, and a story developed. It evolved, right? It became something bigger than that. These true stories were kept together in grand libraries of royal princes and churches and things like that to form the basis of history as we understand it today. Historical accounts of events that happened way longer than any of us have been alive to go, that allow us to keep a history. But around the same time as historical records were being kept, people started writing down fanciful things. They started writing books. You think about, obviously not around the same time as it was created, but you think about like Shakespeare, Roald Dahl, any kind of author that you think of is creating this story purely for the imagination and attention and entertainment of the audience, and to capture their, imaginative spirit. So this has kind of continued to evolve in the day-to-day. Something that I think is really quite interesting these days is Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat stories. Does anyone watching have a comment on that kind of thing? What does an Instagram story mean in this day and age compared to maybe, a campfire story or something that's a little bit older? What does this new stories thing have to do with where we're at the moment? I'll just make it seem like I'm not on a earthquake. I'm going to slide out of screen. So my thinking on a Instagram or Facebook or a Snapchat story or things like that is it's that kind of thing that I was talking about earlier, and exactly what Vic brought up before. It's a way that you can express yourself, right? It's a way that you can be heard. Your story is just basically a record of things that you think are noteworthy and shareable with all of your loved ones and people of relevance. So these days, not only are we telling a story, face to face or writing something down, we're also sharing our story every day with hundreds of people like never ever before. Think poets. Sarah says, Instagram stories feel fleeting versus a story that goes on for generations. True. Absolutely. So we can kind of imagine comparing the two. Imagine comparing Dreamtime stories from Indigenous culture versus, your Instagram story of 24 hours. One of them is, transcended generations and cultural changes and natural disasters and all sorts of things. And the other one lasts for 24 hours. Absolutely. They do feel kind of fleeting. And in some way that's kind of freeing, I guess, to be able to have that, to share that experience with knowing that it's not going to be repeated for thousands and thousands of years. But obviously this has continued to develop, right? We got stories about, we got Facebook and Instagram stories. We've also got like movies and televisions, right? These are also stories. When you hear something on the news, that's a story. When you are watching, a TV show, your favorite series to stream right now while you're stuck inside, that's a story that someone has created. And it's our entire being at the moment, stories. I know that they change and they evolve, but, when we're thinking about documentaries or TV shows and things like that, there's all of this inspiration, this creativity being inspired to create like memes, discussion, interaction, all based on this story. Have you seen all those Tiger King memes? I know that my girlfriend loves them, and all it is just shared jokes about a same shared experience through this outrageous, crazy story. So while storytelling in the past has, started from almost like a historical values lesson kind of impact, it definitely has evolved. It's evolved into entertainment pretty foremost, with also like a spattering of lessons and knowledge and history in between as well. Maybe Tiger King, I don't really know what the values are there. Don't murder your husband. Not sure. But in this age of connection as well, we're more connected than ever. We're going to hear more stories than ever before, right? think about it. On the drive to work or to school, you're radio cranking. You're hearing stories from people around you in the nation about their experiences in this current crisis and the commentary of the commentators. You see it on TV. You see it with your friends at school or at work. You see it when you come home and scroll on your news feeds. Always, always, always being fed other people's experiences, other people's shared feelings or expressed feelings in the form of story. So what I would like to kind of have a discuss with a few people that are here, that are watching today, is kind of what makes a good story. How can you, at home, create a story of your own? Like, when was the last memorable story that you remember? Was it a movie? Was it a book? Was it your mum, your brother, your sister, your friend telling you something? These interactions with people, these shared experiences, what made that a memorable story for you? If you have any of those, please feel free to share below. But they can mean anything. So maybe, I know for me, there are two really important things that I think make a really good story. One of those is emotion. I want a story to make me laugh, or make me cry, or make me horrified, or make me feel something, right? And also I want suspense. I want a purpose. I want to be held in the edge of my seat, waiting for the resolution of this story, right? So emotion, very important. Suspense, the way it's delivered. So in like a traditional, yeah, absolutely, Vic. If you identify with the story, for sure, that makes a massive, massive difference in the enjoyability of the story. If you feel like you could be there, or you feel like that has happened to you before, it absolutely makes a massive difference in making it more memorable for you. Do you have a story in mind, Vic, when something like that happens? In a traditional English style setting of storytelling, there are 5 different themes that need to be made up about a story. So the first is character, setting, plot, conflict, resolution, right? So character in most of the stories these days is us. We are our character. But maybe that character is also your partner who did something silly, or your brother who you went on an adventure with, or your friend who you're retelling their story, right? So the character can be anything, anyone. If you were to go home and create a story right now, who would the character be, right? Setting. Now, the setting can be what's happening right now, or what has happened in the past, or what has happened in the future. So the time that we're in is the setting, but also the physical place. So maybe the story that you could create for yourself would be me a week ago out in the bush with my friends, or me at the end of the school holidays gearing up, ready to go back to school after not seeing my mates for 4 weeks. Crazy, right? This story can be at home, at work, in a world of your own creation. It doesn't matter, but the setting makes an important part of a story. Then you have to think about your plot. Now, your plot really is basically what happens. It's the framework of your story, but it's also the message that you want to deliver. So let's take the example of last week in the bush with my friends, right? Characters, me and my friends. Setting, a week ago in the bush. Plot, we finally escape the confines of city living to get out into the bush and create a couple of days of hiking, right? And on that hike, what happened? The plot is the hike. What happened is the conflict. Now, this is the hook. This is the suspense that I'm talking about. During a story, something has to happen that makes you not just think that this is someone just rambling on. Something has to happen that makes you, what, really? No way. We call this the conflict. We call this like the moment of spurred interest, right? So, for example, in this story, a week ago, me and my friends were hiking in the bush. We're finally away from city life. We're getting our bush time. We're exploring nature. And my friend, let's say Simon, is bitten by a snake. He's bitten by a snake on his ankle and he's stranded out in the bush, right? Now, already, you don't know where that's going to go. You don't have any idea as to what's going to happen. And that's where it's going to hold us in here. And the last point of the 5 points of the English story is the resolution. How did you get over this conflict? So that my mate Simon's been bitten by a snake. We're out in the bush. No one's around. But luckily, in the job that I've done, I've been trained in snake bite, first aid. And so we've got a friend of ours to run to the nearest hill, get on his cell phone and call an ambulance. We've bound his leg from top to bottom and we've kept it nice and stable, and we put him in his place where he's nice and comfortable in shade. My mate's come back. He's told us that the ambulance is coming. They're going to be 20 minutes. And all we do then is we're going to keep him nice and calm. And guess what? The conversation that we have during that time was just another story. Wow. Thrilling. So, before we kind of wrap up, I'd like to let you be the storyteller. My mission for you, my message for you guys at home is to, maybe by the end of the weekend or maybe by sometime next week, to think of a story that you want to deliver to someone in your life. Something that you would like to do to entertain them. So maybe comment below if you have someone in mind or to tell a story to, or someone in your life that you could go to for help on being a better storyteller, right? Someone in your life, maybe it's your granddad or your nana or your mum or your dad. Comment who you'd like to tell a story to or who you think is a good storyteller. Because really, storytelling is something you can only get better at by doing, right? It's practice. It's the way you deliver it. And exactly what Vic said, it's relevance. It's how you identify with the story that makes it more memorable, right? So practice on your loved ones at home. Think of a story that you want that will be relevant to the person that you are telling it to, and work on how you want to deliver it. Are you going to be animated, excited? Are you going to be serious, sad? How will that affect the tone of your story, and how will that make you as a storyteller? So, before I sign out today, I'd like to give you an example of a story of my own. To give you an example of a story that you can create at home is something just from my experiences that I've been happy to share, right? So, in the company that I work for as a facilitator, we start a lot of our stories as if we were there in first person. So that's what I'm going to do now as well. So, the year is 2019, and I am 24 years old. And after a hiking trip in the Northern Territory, I met a guy named Matt, who is an epic avid hiker. And he told me that what he wanted to do more than anything else was to hike the Cape to Cape. And I was flying back to WA, and I'd never done it. And I said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. So he books his flights over, he books a rental car in, and we head down the coast to do this Cape to Cape. Now, this is the biggest hike that I've ever done in my entire life. From start to finish, it's 143 kilometers, right? Given that the longest hike I'd done before this was 78K. So this is like almost doubling the hike that I'd done before, right? And I'm feeling excited. I'm not feeling nervous. I'm not feeling scared. We've loaded up all of our groceries. We've gone for a big shop. We've bought 6 days worth of food, and we're ready to go. And we drop one car off. We go to start at the end. We stay in a hotel overnight, and we find our location where we're going to finish, and we drive back up to Cape Naturalist to start our walk. And it's a beautiful day. We've picked a window where the weather is perfect. It's been raining and bucketing the day before. It's clearing up on the day we like, and we're in for 6 days of forecast sunshine. And we start to walk down the coast, and it just feels natural. It feels beautiful. The birds are singing. I've got a little notebook. I'm writing down every little tree, things like that I find. And every campsite we stop at is beautiful. The first one is surrounded in beautiful bush in a little valley with a fireplace. The next one is surrounded, it's on a cliff on a little peninsula with lilies all around it and a view of all of the bays and beaches we're going to walk in next. We get to our third night, and the third person on our adventure is coming up in blisters. She's got some gnarly blisters on her feet, and she doesn't know if she can continue. And so we have to make a decision in that moment to leave her behind. It's really hard. It's heartbreaking. But it means that our issue that we were having with being picked up at the end is no longer there. She will go and get the car and drive back. And as she starts unloading her backpack and giving us all of her food and things like that, we realize that without her pulling out, we would not have had enough food to complete the journey. We would have been rationing. So it's day 3 out of 6, and we've reloaded all of our bags with all this extra food. They're 3 times as heavy as they were before, and our feet are twice as tired, and we're kind of feeling a bit flat for leaving one of our people behind. But we push on. And over the next couple of days, we witnessed some beautiful, amazing things. I witnessed the cliffs at Conto at sunset. We cook a meal on the top of a cave with the waves echoing and crashing beneath us. We get caught out. One of my mates loses his phone. To spend 3 hours looking for his phone, and then we have to walk in the dark across blowholes and big caverns until we get to our next campsite at like 10 o'clock at night. All of this crazy stuff is unfolding, and the whole time I am filled with this wonderful sense of joy and adventure. And it gets to the 5th night. It's the last night there. Me and Matt are drinking chamomile teas under the stars, looking up at this perfectly lit up sky, knowing that we've only got one more day to walk, right? And it's the shortest day so far. And we get up the next morning with the intention of smashing this out by midday, just hammering the walk out, getting it over and done with. And we get there and we realize that this 19 Ks of walking is all beach. It's just trudging through the sand with our heavy backpacks on and the sun beating down on us. And so we drop down onto the beach, and I notice that there's just rubbish. So we've got slightly empty backpacks. I decided to pick up some rubbish. So I'm picking up as much as I can handle. Matt's too tired to do anything except walk. So he just keeps trudging along, walking. And I'm just picking up rubbish. Kilos and kilos. Plastic bottles, syringe things, bits of nylon rope, broken tubs, everything you can imagine, old toy guns, things like that are everywhere along the beach. And I'm just picking them up into bags and cartons that I find on the beach and putting them in my backpack every time. And every time we stop, I put another couple of kilos in my bag, right? And this continues for 19 kilometers non-stop, me and Matt picking up rubbish. And we eventually get to the end. We get picked up. I'm crying by this point. I am sad. I'm devastated by the fact that I never expected to see this much waste in Australia. And we weigh everything that we've collected on the scales at the end of the day in the motel room that we're staying. We weigh all of this plastic equipment, and over that 19 kilometers, me and Matt had picked up 8.5 kilos of discarded rubbish and plastic, and it broke my heart because I had to leave so much behind. And while that moment there was quite confronting for me, the overall experience felt like I'd just made a positive impact. I was reawakened in my desire to recycle more. I had collected a bit of rubbish that would have been turned into rubbish in the ocean, and I'd completed the biggest hike ever and made a friend for life. So that story there, I guess, is me sharing something that I hope you guys will find a little bit of relevance in. The sadness that we find when we notice litter on the side of the road. And the message that I'm trying to send to you guys is that we all can do our own little part. Even though it crushed me to do so, I continue to pick things up, and so can you. So my homework for you, find a person that you want to tell a story to. Find a message that you want to give to them. Maybe it's just how happy you were in a certain moment. Maybe it's something that you should all do better. Find someone who you think can be an example of your storytelling. How does your mum or dad or guardian tuck you into bed at night when they tell you a story? How does your friends make you laugh and joyful when they tell you a story? Think of things that you've enjoyed as a storyteller and use them to tell your story. And by the end of the weekend or sometime in the middle of the week, I want you to share that story with someone. And feel free to post a video on the page of the story that you've shared, maybe in the comments below, or just a comment of how it goes. And yeah, make your own difference. Make someone feel something, express yourself, help them identify with each other, make that connection. Because in this crazy time, in this weirdly hectic world at the moment that you guys are in, this is an amazing time to make stories, to remember these moments, to express how you're feeling and where you're at in this crazy historic time. So hopefully you've learned a little bit, or even just been entertained for a half hour or so on a Friday afternoon. I want to leave this little opportunity here at the end where I'll hang around if you guys want to ask me any questions. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Dahl is an amazing storyteller, just in his whimsical ways and his crazy abstract ideas that he brings back into humanity, for sure. And your mum is going to love it. Your mum will love it, James. Yeah, I'll stay on here if you have any other questions or anything like that in regards to stories. If maybe you guys just have a question about storytelling and its history, or how you can tell a better story, or if you just have no idea about what kind of story you want, I will be waiting around on this feed to respond to some of your messages. In the meantime, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope that it was a really enjoyable way to spend your Friday afternoons. It has been an absolute honor to be on here and having this discussion with you. Shout out to Damien, Sarah, Vic, and James for keeping the discussion rolling. You guys are my heroes. Thank you very much. And yeah, may see you guys in the future at some point. Damien says, what is the best way to start a story? So, in my personal opinion, a story can start in lots of different ways, but I think there's two different ways you can get intrigue. Intrigue is always the most important way to start a story. If you want to start a recent, spontaneous story, you'll never guess what happened to me. Is a great way to start a story. But maybe you just want to start off by getting that person engaged. Man, have I got something to tell you. Oh, the most amazing thing happened to me. Yay, I'm glad, Vic. I'm glad that your kids are planning their stories. Even writing them down, guys, if you don't feel comfortable doing the oral presentation, writing down a story of any kind and sharing that with someone will be such an amazing opportunity. But yeah, I think the start of a story, if you can't capture people in that first 10 seconds, then you have a little bit after that you need to work on. So make sure that your story starts off with a hook, right? A big bang, a question, an emotion from you that you want to inspire in them. Those, I think, are some of the best ways that you can start a story. Awesome. This is Shaq signing out. I'll hang around on the page and view a few of the comments, but thank you everyone for being involved. Is free throwing, handwriting, or typing best for ideas? Oh, I have an amazing book that I tend to scroll. For me, when I'm writing stories for Dungeons and Dragons, I tend to use dot points. I want to get the framework of my story down pat, and then I go from there. But sometimes the whole thing will come to you in a first draft and you can edit it from there. For me, I like dot points for structure and then to fill those out and expand on them from there. These are the ways in which I've told stories that can go on for 4, 5, 6 hours. You ask my girlfriend, they get a bit crazy. But yeah, thank you very much, guys. If you have any questions, leave them below and I will answer them as best as I can. In the words of Damien, peace, love and peace. And I will talk to you all